I'm Christoph. I'm the organizer, but today is very much a team effort. We have sponsors, we have the partners, we have you lovely people who have helped us to promote the event on social media. Um, we have friends working behind the scenes. And of course, we've got a team of very wonderful speakers who are very generously donating their time and expertise and research with us today. So I was wondering, given that they are doing so, generously, or doing that so generously, if we can put our hands together just at the start of the day for that effort. And thank you. They are dotted across the audience. So, right. Good morning, Professor Kuiken. We have literally just started the day, and I have to say, I have never started my day welcoming Professor Kuiken to to anything. So it's weirdly wonderful. A few words about safety. In case of a fire alarm, we are in the Barbirolli room, by the way. The circle foyer space is upstairs. This will be the main exit. If you're a wheelchair user, the main exit is the back of this Barbirolli room, and there will be assistance for you there, okay? So, at the start of any event, there is likely to be a little bit of excitement. And by that I mean anxiety, or a little apprehension around being a part of a group. Maybe you had to rush to get here this morning. Maybe, what's she called, Babette, made your journey challenging. I know it did for some people. So may I invite you to join me in just a few moments of settling together. And I appreciate not everybody in this audience has an existing meditation practice, so feeling free to just simply be. There's no need to close your eyes. You're welcome to do so. So let's just take a moment to arrive here. A sense of being here in this room, this venue, this city. Perhaps bring the attention to our feet, making contact with the floor, or the seat of the body, making contact with the chair. Perhaps also noticing where the hands are right now, resting in our lap. Just taking a few moments to arrive. And I'd also like to drop in the idea of maybe thinking, about an intention for today. What would support me today at this event? How can I best take care of myself? And then once again, expanding the attention into the whole body, sitting here. And in your own time, allowing the eyes to open again if they were closed. Thank you. So 2 years ago, our first event, the theme emerged quite naturally because we were coming out of lockdown. And so the theme was just joy, the sheer joy of meeting in person. Last year, the theme was beyond personal practice and more about the social application of mindfulness. That was explored across the various talks. This year's theme is keeping mindfulness relevant. And so we've aimed to put together a program that reflects that theme. So across the day, we have speakers here in the Barbirolli room, and then in parallel, a speaker upstairs in the circle foyer. And their talks are connecting mindfulness to, for example, climate breakdown, social disruption, social cohesion, trauma-informed mindfulness. Some speakers are presenting work that they've done, research with clinical populations and how that help might be useful for the general population, and to quote Willem, to support us for the next 50 years, in all of our mental well-being. And when I first read that in the talk description, I was like, 50 years, that sounds like a long time. And then I had to go to London this week to have my Belgian passport renewed. And it said the expiry date is 2030. And I was like, that's light years away. And I was like, no, that's 7 years around the corner. So 2050 is not all that far off. Just in closing, different topics, and I've named the main ones, and all speakers are very open to give a bit of a talk and then to welcome questions from the audience. So it's a very interactive day. Okay, there's no lectures taking place. So on that note, thank you again for being here. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your support. Thank you for making this a possibility. We wish you a nourishing day. Go well. And an invitation now, I suppose, to either stay here in Barbaroli for the first talk with Professor Crane and Dr. Lunn, or to make your way to the Circle Foyer to listen to Louise Hayes and her talk about mindfulness and internet and online addiction, etc., etc. So, thank you very much. Have a lovely day, everyone. Yeah. Oh. Perhaps also very importantly, there is a second opportunity for coffee after the first talk, so in about 45 minutes' time. Okay? Thank you.
Are the lights really necessary? I don't think so. I was thinking the same thing. Because it's hard to see people.
But that's for the video. Yeah, like
Very glary, isn't it?
So again, a very warm welcome to the first talk with Professor Rebecca Crane, who has helped to establish and run very successfully the CMRP, the Center for Mindfulness Research and Practice in Bangor, at Bangor University. So a very warm welcome, Professor Crane, and Dr. Lunn, Dr. Ken Lunn, Director of the Mindfulness Network and a great supporter of the Manchester Mindfulness Festival. Thank you for that. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to just hand over to you. So a talk and an opportunity for Q&A towards the end. So I'll wait for a sign from you guys to let me know, and then I'll come back in. Is that okay? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Christoph. And it's such a delight to be here. And really impressive that you and the team have gathered this together, this incredible space. Yeah, I'm hoping that the lights that are up there might be dimmed, because it's actually, I'm finding it a little tricky to see you all. But it's what I'd really love, and it's not going to happen, but we could sort of, oh, that's nice. Yeah. Yeah. It, sort of metaphorically, if we could have a sense of gathering together a bit closer in a circle, because what I'd really love is an exchange and a dialogue around these themes. So none of us landed here in Manchester this morning accidentally. We all came, some of us, long distances, for a reason. And for some of us, what the draw to mindfulness is very, very personal. It's very, very much about my well-being, my health. For some of us, it's about our relationships, our wish to be maybe more caring in the world or more kind. And for some of us, it's this wider theme that Christoph was speaking about, that we really care about the world, and we really would love the world to be a more nurturing, safe, kindly, compassionate space. And for some of us, it spreads across all of these, because these are not mutually, they're all interlinked. And for me, it started very close in, and I think that may be the case for a lot of us. I came in my late teens, early 20s, sort of accidentally tripped into contact with the practice, and it caught me. And it was a very personal thing. It was about my suffering. But as I engaged in the work over time, and it began to become part of my professional practice, I began to really care about how this could impact in the wider sphere. And our work at the Centre for Mindfulness in Bangor really started, our initial mission was around supporting the uptake of MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, in the NHS, in our health service. And so really supporting the rollout of the evidence around the impact of MBCT on depression in the long term. And that was our starting aspiration. And we initially set up as a training organization to enable clinicians to roll this work out. And it's hard to sort of put ourselves back 20 years ago. At that time, so in the early 2000s, mindfulness was really not heard about. So the work was very different then. It was really about making a case, communicating what this thing is. Now it's really out there, that the challenge is really different. It's often about helping people to really understand what mindfulness is, rather than kind of being connected to their sense of what it is. So over time, so really that was our work, was this work of enabling the uptake, and then it broadened out into other mainstream institutions, into our workplaces, into our schools, into health and into justice systems. So we were really looking at the mainstreaming of mindfulness and what's needed to enable that to happen with integrity. And I guess I'm sort of casting back, because I think that's really important to the question that Christoph has posed around how do we make mindfulness relevant now? It's never been a static thing. It's always been an evolving process. And there's always the question of, how do we direct the work now? How do we evolve it? How do we shape it? How do we keep it relevant? And over the last 20 years, the context has changed hugely, and social context and the environmental context. And so there's a really necessary question of, what's the best contribution that this work can make to the time that we're in? And it's a very personal question. I think many of us are asking, in the context of the multiple challenges that we're facing as a society and environmentally, is like, how might I contribute? And it is a really challenging question. Often we feel, we can feel quite impotent. I wanted to share with you, because I thought I found it really helpful, the sharing that John Kabat-Zinn gave around his sort of early intentions. And he's written a paper called Talking Vietnam Meditation Blues, a snapshot from the past, or is it the future? And he spoke about this quite recently as well. So this was when he was in his early 20s and was doing a PhD at MIT in the States, and was horrified by how much of the resources of this incredible institution was being dedicated to developing weapons of mass destruction, and how little inquiry was going on around the ethics of that. And he was really trying to stimulate inquiry into that. And he managed to bring the whole institution to a complete stop one day by galvanizing a protest, in front of the MIT entranceway. And his PhD supervisor, apparently, in the days after that, said to him, why can't you do something constructive? And he spoke about MBSR as being one constructive response that he had. He always had this big vision. So, of course, MBSR is close-in work for each of the individuals who come to it. But he also had this intention about systemic change, about how that delivering MBSR anywhere is an intervention within the system and the ripples that can come out of that. And he really had a passion around holistic healthcare, integrative healthcare, participatory healthcare. And actually, if you look back 40 years, MBSR has really made a massive contribution to that. Just to give you a quote from his paper, because I think these are really helpful for us as we reflect on, what's called for now and how can I contribute now? He spoke about some of us at that time were looking for a place to stand and to be and to work that had the integrity of a greater awareness of the whole of things. For all the contradictions and paradoxes that we knew or quickly learned are part and parcel of living in this world. We were also incredibly angry and disillusioned about what was going on. And then just a very brief quote from later in the paper. He says, every generation needs to come to its own view of what is actually going on in the world and how to interface with what has been inherited and contribute its own energies and imaginations to what is most worth preserving and what needs to be reconfigured to serve a larger purpose that may not have been perceived earlier. Every generation needs to make its own assessment of what it has inherited from its elders, and usually the reading of that legacy is not entirely pretty. Nevertheless, it needs to be described accurately, or we will just sink more deeply into delusion and somnambulance, and thus perhaps cause even greater harm to unfold. By our willingness to name what is, we can take steps to lovingly perturb the organism, the system, the body politic, in specific and hopefully wise ways, to generate new ways of seeing and new unthought of options for dealing with age-old problems. It is not even so much the means that are important, but the quality of mind and heart behind the means. So, yeah, I found those helpful. It's just this sort of pointing to, like, where am I coming from in my kind of struggle to find a place to stand in the midst of what is happening in the world, and where do we each direct our energies? So I just wanted to just briefly name a little bit about how we as an organization in Bangor are aiming to kind of pivot our energies in the context of what's happening in the different context of our time. So we're still doing the work of supporting the uptake of mindfulness in the NHS. That feels like really important work to continue. And the work of, the close-in work of supporting people to come to classes and do the work that's needed for them personally. We also believe that it's important to train our teachers and to support our teachers to, whenever we're teaching a mindfulness course, to actually teach it with an awareness of context and diversity. And so to bring, I think one of the learnings that we've had over the years is that more of that is needed, more contextualization of the teachings in the time that we're in, and to support people to look at how, particularly in the second phase of an 8-week course, how this work can be of relevance in the wider space, so that we're empowering people to really see that this is the ground from which we can take action in the world. This inner connection translates into outer engagement. But we've also been exploring, and actually to that end, so there's I had a wonderful collaboration with a group of racially diverse colleagues from the UK and from the US, and we came together in conversation and ended up writing a paper together about the MBSR curriculum and about, we called the paper A Curriculum That's Up to the Task. And what we mean by that is up to the task of really facing into the true challenges of both that we face as individuals, but also collectively. And we were really reflecting on what might that mean. And so we had wonderful conversation and then developed it as a paper to hopefully communicate it out to the world. And the paper is, as papers are, relatively short, but then underneath that there's a body of resources to support teachers to teach mindfulness with social awareness, socially engaged mindfulness practice. And those resources are freely available on the Mindfulness Network website. We can point you towards them. And we're also doing some research to gather all the research together. So we're currently engaged in a review of all the research that's out there that is related to mindfulness-based programs that have an intention to be of service to what we're calling bigger than self concerns, that go beyond the immediacy. I'm not diminishing this, really important, but go beyond the immediacy of depression prevention, well-being, or personal outcomes, into the wider space of relational outcomes and engagement with bigger systemic questions around climate change and racial justice. So at the moment, there's actually a lot of work that's happening, and the curve of research that's in that direction is sharp. And what we're intending to do is to sort of gather it together so that we can offer it back to everybody as a body of work, and hopefully support that work to become more coherent and coordinated. It's quite disparate at the moment, but there's some beautiful work happening in that space, and we're hoping that we can communicate that out more skillfully. But I guess there's a real inquiry for all of us as to around how can contemplative practices be of relevance, be of service in this time. Jamie Bristow, who was the director of the Mindfulness Initiative and is now working on with the Inner Development Goals, he speaks really potently around the climate crisis as a crisis of relationship. The sense of how the disconnect that we have with ourselves, with each other, on the wider level with nature and the natural world. And that's where if we really look, that's where the trouble begins. And how do we heal that disconnect? And there's lots of ways. There's lots of things that need to happen. It's certainly, mindfulness practices, contemplative practices are definitely not the only thing that's needed. But as part of a whole plethora of ways to support us to transition as a society, I really believe that contemplative practices have a place. And for me, it's the work I do. So that's my best service, my best offering to the world at this time. And I want to just end before I hand over to Ken with one final quote from John, because it was just later in the same paper. I thought that this was really lovely. We have the potential to grow into ourselves, each in our own way and according to our own heart. We have the potential to discern how much of our own actions or inactions may be driven by greed, hatred, delusion, or just plain inertia. and work consciously, inwardly and outwardly, to learn our way out of unwise frames of seeing and doing. So this, I think that, part of what keeps mindfulness relevant is this very direct connection between the inward and the outward. It's like, how can we do this inner work? And how can this inner work really translate into ways of engaging in the world that are truly embedded in wisdom? Yeah. So I'm going to hand over to Ken, and then hopefully we can pick up in conversation around these themes. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. Is this working okay? Good. Yeah, I'll follow that. I'm Ken Lunn. I'm the director of the Mindfulness Network. I'll say a little bit in a few minutes about the Mindfulness Network and what we do, but maybe, like Becca, a bit of a personal reflection on what brought me here. And it's almost 28 years ago to the day, on my 40th birthday, I bought myself a meditation course. And I won't say anything about the mess my life was in at the time, but it's an interesting reflection to go back. At the time, finding somebody to teach me meditation was really quite difficult. But I was quite determined, and a good friend of mine, who I didn't know was a meditator, he kept that under the covers for probably about 10, 15 years. When I said, I'm thinking of doing this, but am I going crazy? He said, you're going crazy, but try it. So I started with the meditation technique, and I've now had a daily meditation practice for 28 years. And I became a bit of a meditation tourist. I've tried different traditions, different types of meditation. But it's interesting, at the time, I did keep quiet about meditating. Somehow meditators find each other. There were much smaller groups in those days. So, but I did find some groups to support me and find different ways of developing my practice. So it's 10 years ago, when I was looking to retire from quite a senior job in the NHS, I decided, what am I going to do? And I guess this goes back to the point about contributing back and giving back. I didn't need to work then. I was very, very lucky of being able to retire. I could have gone off and played golf, but I don't really qualify for that, and it holds no interest whatsoever. So how can I actually do something that contributes and gives back? And that's when I decided to train and learn a little bit more about mindfulness, which was becoming, at that point, 10 years ago, really quite prominent in the press. And that's when I first met Becca. I don't think she will remember the fact that I was one of the people that she welcomed on the first day. And I thought, who's this wonderful, smiley person that's saying hello to me? And I then was really privileged to have Becca support me through my dissertation. So that was also a journey. But interestingly, by then, there was a groundswell of interest in mindfulness, so that when I was then able to teach, I was able to fill my classes fairly well. I was doing some work with a local adult education college, with a local yoga studio, and with a local Buddhist center. And I had no difficulty finding people who were desperately keen to learn about mindfulness. And so I was very, very privileged for a few years to be able to offer quite a range of courses at different levels, and to meet my Bamba registration fairly quickly. I think I was one of the first registered Bamba teachers when Bamba came online. So it's interesting to see how things have changed over 10 years. But now I'm working for the Mindfulness Network, who I've been with for 7 years. I finished my master's course, and I rather foolishly in a meeting said, I wonder what I'm going to do next. Well, here I am. So my quiet retirement, teaching a few mindfulness classes, became a little bit more than that. So I've been with the network for 7 years. I've done 3 different roles. I'm now the director, which I've been in that role for 2 years. And we're now seeing a whole range of changes now in the mindfulness world. We've trained an awful lot of people to teach 8-week courses, and we're beginning to see that the appetite for 8-week courses, it may not have dwindled, but the supply of teachers is much higher. But also, I think we're beginning, as Becca related, to understand that the application of mindfulness isn't just about teaching 8-week courses, that we need to reach out and find different ways of introducing mindfulness into the world. And that needn't necessarily be through courses like MBSR or MBCT, but different ways. 5-6 years ago, we entered into a collaboration agreement with Bangor University. So we're, over the last 5 years, we've taken on the teacher training pathway that originated at Bangor University. And we had 2 very successful years, I think, in transferring that teacher training pathway into the Mindfulness Network. And then we had 2 interesting years, which started on the 23rd of March 2020, which is printed in my mind because that was the day I was supposed to be going on holiday, and I didn't. I locked the front door and stayed in, as we all did. And those next 2 years were quite transformative for us as a training and retreat organisation, and were quite transformative for all of us in all sorts of ways. And I think as we've come out of the worst of the pandemic, we are beginning to see some other changes that are coming up. We started to see a drop in interest in people wanting to train to teach mindfulness in the way we were teaching them. At the network, we have been looking quite hard at the curriculum, and we've come up with a new and revised curriculum for training people in mindfulness. So the Mindfulness Network is a charity. It was formed as a charity in 2018. I think I was the first chair of the charity, and you, Becca, were one of the first trustees. We've grown and evolved quite a lot over that time. We now include a range of trainings. We offer supervision. We offer mindfulness retreats with some different routes including some compassion-based retreats, so that we've got quite a diverse range of retreats. And it's been interesting to reflect, coming here, that actually the retreat area of our work has actually stabilized and is developing very well. So there's obviously a group of people that need the annual retreats, not just purely because they want to meet their BAMBA registration, but for other deeply personal reasons. The teacher training pathway has dipped in terms of recruitment in the UK, but we're beginning to see green shoots of having a new curriculum which is much more focused on different routes for offering mindfulness. So those routes include offering mindfulness as a one-to-one element alongside some other aspects, some other therapy or coaching or training element. Mindfulness to support people in the workplace. And we also now offer a slightly different entry point into our training, which is there to encourage those who maybe don't want to go on to teach an 8-week course or teach in a particular workplace, but maybe just want to lead some local mindfulness meditation sessions in their local community. So we've adapted to what we perceive as a change in the demand in the UK. And we're also developing an insight into demand around the world, because one of the things that came with the pandemic was suddenly we were no longer people who organised things in rooms. By the way, it's lovely to be in a room with a group of people instead of looking at a little screen where I can only see 20 of you. But actually, we were organising in-person events. We changed that in the period of 6 months into mainly an online, but that's brought in a huge interest from not just around Europe. There's a lot of interest around the world in mindfulness, and it's, you know, we're gaining an understanding of what the demand is, not just nationally but internationally. So I hope that gives you a bit of a picture about the Mindfulness Network, and maybe you know, some of my personal reflections sort of match some of your own. And then the final thing is that next August we're running a conference with the university at Bangor University, which will be a hybrid conference where you can come along to Bangor and meet a range of, the intention is to facilitate some real physical connection where, you know, people will be able to get together and explore some aspects of mindfulness. And the theme of the conference is mindfulness in a changing world. And we'll be launching, well, the website is now live. I'm an IT guy, so I have great aspirations for that staying live for the whole week. But yeah, but the website is live, and more and more information will be available on that. But it's a great honour to be helping and facilitating a conference that is exactly on this theme about reaching out and finding ways that we can actually engage people in mindfulness who are really facing and dealing with the really broader challenges of today. So I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say about the conference, Becca.
Yeah, just to add really that my sense like today is about, in a way, very much the same themes. And I really feel that it's only through collaborative exploration and dialogue and inquiry together that we can find ways to lift the good work that everybody's doing onto another level, and to find ways to connect it together in ways that have meaning. So the conference is really intended in that direction. So we'll be bringing together wonderful speakers, but actually it's about all of us coming together to be part of a conversation. Yeah, so I mean, and that's very much the spirit that we've redeveloped our training program, sort of, rather than training people in packages of programs, which are wonderful packages, MBCT, MBSR, but we're also recognizing that there's an enormous amount of creative work that's happening, and that people on the ground in their own context, if they're empowered with skills to understand mindfulness, can actually really take this work in ways that have meaning in their particular context. And that's, so our training program has kind of changed from being curriculum-led to being much more process-led, to support this the sort of diversifying of how mindfulness might be relevant in the world. Yeah, so I think we're going to shift and... Lovely. It'd be really lovely to hear from you, to have reflections, conversation around these themes together for the remainder of the time.
Thank you. And if I can ask you to sort of get to the heart of your question as quickly as possible, then we can answer quite a few questions within the space that we've got. So just raise your hand and I'll come over with the microphone if you'd like to ask a question.
Where do we find the information about starting the training?
I have a word with Joelle, who's got we've got a stand upstairs, but we have a website. She'll be able to give you details of the website, and some information to take away.
Hi, Becca. You spoke of collaboration, exploration, and dialogue. What do you think the role that mindfulness could play with citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy, where people are brought together, and sometimes on very divisive issues like abortion in Ireland, where they get a range of people, 100 people that perfectly match the population. They meet over 5 weekends, they're given stuff to read, they listen with respect, and people listen to the language they're using, the terminology, how people's views change over the course of 5 weeks. And the gifts of mindfulness, discernment, and listening, could these be overlain in those deliberative democracies to make it a better forum, a more informed forum, to tap into that collective wisdom and not let the tweeters and the Facebookers in the extremes lead people by the nose into hateful ways? What role do you think mindfulness could play?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Really, really beautiful. And I think, in a way, what your point, I was saying at the end of my talk, you know, there's many things that need to happen that can help us to shift. And I'm really inspired by citizen assemblies. Our democracy certainly needs to be democratized. And that seems to me to be a very just a fantastic way of getting all the, you know, these views together. But then you need a process for how we engage when we're in those spaces. And I wouldn't tend to call it mindfulness. But I, you know, ultimately it is. It's about how do we engage together in respectful listening. And so I'd love to know more about how those spaces are facilitated now, but it seems to me that training the people who are facilitating those spaces in mindfulness might be really, really helpful as one way to support them to help to pass on ways of engaging that have respect and care and honouring of the other, whatever their views, at the heart. So yeah, a beautiful question, and I felt enlivened just by hearing you speak about that. It feels a really inspiring possibility.
Hi, Rebecca and Ken. Thanks for speaking. Sorry, excuse me. I'm just wondering. So now, except mindfulness meditation, they also have a variety meditation, like heartfulness meditation or other more like religion-based meditation. I just wondering, anyway, like mindfulness meditation, it's still during the development. So do you think it's necessary or possible, like for people who are practice mindfulness meditation and trying to teach mindfulness meditation to others, they also request to explore more different types of meditation for their personal journey or for their teaching and also research. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the word mindfulness is a very difficult, unhelpful word. And it's probably, if we could park it, it might be a good thing to do, but I don't think we can at this stage. Because all the things that, I mean, in a way, the way Jon Kabat-Zinn used that word was in a very broad way that did encompass heartfulness and compassion and all the breadth of different practices that are included in the traditional ways of teaching these practices. So, and as a teacher, I think it's really, really helpful to diversify. So the 8-week course gives a very good starting point. But actually, it's a tiny element of the whole repertoire of, there's a huge menu of practices that are out there. And I think it's really good to explore and play around with them and see, you know, if we're to make this a pathway in our lives, our practice is going to serve us in different ways at different times, and drawing on different aspects of the practice is really helpful. So yeah, go for it. Go out there and play.
Yeah, I would encourage you to go out and play. In fact, in some respects, coming to mindfulness training 18 years of practice, where I had been something of not a tourist, I was quite deeply involved in a different range of traditions, mainly coming from spiritual traditions or self-taught secular. I'm finding now as a mindfulness teacher, when I get somebody coming in and asking me the question, is this mindfulness or not? The answer is never yes or no. The answer is always, usually, like as a good mindfulness teacher, is tell me more about what you're looking for. But it's just finding, I think different practices speak to different people in different ways. So MBCT, MBSR, which we offer, we also offer or support mindfulness self-compassion with Sussex Mindfulness Centre. So there are different people come in with different needs at different times. But I certainly deeply appreciate now having had that diversity of experience. And I continue to train in different styles or different approaches in mindfulness.
One of the thoughts is there's some beautiful work that's been happening around courses that you can take that beyond the 8-week course. So Willem's going to be speaking later about MBCT for Life, and Mark's speaking later about the frame by frame program. So I think these are other ways of deepening and developing our practice. Yeah, thank you.
And also to just briefly acknowledge the arrival of some new people. Welcome to the festival. Thank you for being here.
Do you have a feeling that the world needs mindfulness right now? And can you comment on whether the general public, let's call them, has any perception whatsoever as to what we're talking about and their need to embrace it?
I think I would tend to frame that more as, like, I would say the world definitely needs more kindness, and the world needs more awareness and more wisdom. And there's lots of ways, there's lots of practices and ways of being that develop those qualities, and mindfulness is one very skillful way, but there's other ways. So I think I would feel too grandiose saying the world needs, mindfulness is what the world needs. On one level, yes, but on another level, I'd also be more, respectful of the diversity of ways in. That would be my response.
Yeah, very similar. I think it's easy to say this. We've always needed mindfulness, but how it manifests and how it's supported in different ways. I think there's a danger, and I gave a short presentation at IAMBA recently, when it's very easy to build bridges from just one side. It's actually understanding how people need and want and can be supplied with something we might call mindfulness. So I think that's been a lot of the change in the philosophy, certainly at the Mindfulness Network, but I think also in Bangor, is looking at the other side. So if we're building bridges, we need to build bridges from two sides, not just from one side. So it's not, here is mindfulness as a great thing. It's understanding the needs and saying, how can mindfulness apply for you in whatever context?
Somebody sent me some time ago a cartoon clip, and it was a demo, and there was this bunch of monks demonstrating, and there was one monk standing on a platform saying, "What do we want?" And all the monks gathered in front of him said, "Mindfulness." And the guy on the stage then said, "When do we want it?" And they all said, "Now." And I thought it was quite funny, but actually it was a kind of cautionary tale for me around I don't want to get into kind of like, what we all need is mindfulness. It's like, no, I don't, it's not where I want to be.
Thank you. We have a question here.
So I was intrigued with what you just said about getting rid of the word mindfulness, because I when I'm working with groups and I mention the word mindfulness, and I'll say, does anyone do any mindfulness, have a mindfulness practice? And often people, there's no one in the room, or there's one or two. But then when we kind of get talking about, does anyone use Headspace or Calm? And you'll get 3 or 4 people who'll put their hand up. Yeah? Or then we'll talk about, well, what do you do to kind of relax? What do you do to unwind? Oh, well, I go for a walk, I look at the sky, I listen to the... So we were going to get rid of the word mindfulness. What would you replace it with?
Wow, that's a great question. We could probably do with a several-day conference to answer that question. the challenge is that there's lots of words that point to it, but there isn't really one word. Kindly awareness, heartfulness, love, care, awe, mystery, beauty. How do we put all that together in one word? You've got the answer.
Yeah, that was an unfortunate time to put my hand up. No, thinking back to, it's linked to that as well, but about having mindfulness in context. I'm a NHS clinician, a breathworks teacher, and throughout the pandemic created a post-COVID service and very much mindfulness-led. And I'm not the only one to experience this, but I've found that actually a mindfulness qualification per se is quite difficult to bring mindfulness into the health context if you're not a clinical psychologist or you're not. And actually found that lots of very established, very successful, and they're evidence-based, things that I've developed have been stopped or taken over when someone else joins a team. And I've heard that happen a lot. So it's really sad when things are being contextualized, they are being brought out there, but then actually, despite evidence-based, they're being stopped. Any thoughts or advice? Or?
Yeah, this is a big question. So Willem and I, over a number of years, did a project around the process of implementation of mindfulness-based programs into we were particularly looking at the health service. And, you know, it's hugely complex trying to bring this work into such a complex system as the NHS. And it's uphill work, and it requires ongoing effort to make it happen, and it's certainly not accidental, and it tended to thrive when there was people who were really doing that work of championing it and creating networks to enable it to happen. So whenever there was just a lone practitioner trying to do the work, it didn't thrive. So I guess there's no simple answer to your question. It's complex and it's hard work. And it requires persistence over time and the long view, and a deep love for the NHS, through the troubles because that's in and of itself, it's a troubled organisation that needs all the care it can get. Yeah, thank you for your question and for your work.
Maybe two more.
I guess I'll start by saying I'm not quite sure how to frame this, so apologies if it's not very clear. It's just it's just a reflection, really. It just feels like such a shift, actually, in quite a short period of time. So, here with colleagues from Bangor who've trained in the last 5 years, and really hearing that shift from such an emphasis around curriculum integrity, and really understanding the depth and the background and the mechanisms to then bring into the teaching space and expand into the contextual stuff that we're talking about. And I guess I just wondered what your it's really permission giving in some ways to hear that there is this shift, and that's really wonderful. And I guess at the same time, maybe, are there any concerns about, because obviously, like I say, there are different ways in. So I guess if people were coming, perhaps as you did, Ken, from lots of contemplative backgrounds, perhaps that depth may already be there from other angles. But just, is there a concern then that there's a potential to lose some of the integrity you worked so hard to promote? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, and this is the tension we're navigating. And thank you for naming it. Yeah, I mean, we're not letting go of any of that. Our aspiration is this, we still feel that MBSR, MBCT are incredibly useful vehicles in the world and really good ground from which to be creative as well. But there's definitely, we're shifting in our emphasis, and it's a shift of necessity because, post-pandemic, people are finding that it's very difficult to get people back in person, but also to get people to engage. Something has shifted in terms of the depth that people are willing to say yes to as an initial step. So, you know, finding more pathways in that enable people to make that first step seems really important. So, yeah, you know, that's the dance. Our aim is to, in our training, is to really emphasize that whatever we're teaching, whether it's very light touch or more in depth, actually the light touch is harder, because it, you know, how do you communicate the essence when you've got less time? But both need to come from depth of engagement and embodiment, and that's the way it's communicated. Whatever the curriculum, you know, the way that we communicate the practice is through who we are and how we engage with the world and how we engage with the people in front of us. So, yeah, but this is the inquiry. I think it's really important. It's like, how do we really, part of making these practices relevant is the risk that we actually lose the transformational potential by adapting them to fit some, you know, some perceived sense of what's needed. Yeah.
Just following on from that, there's that sense that perhaps if the teachers are getting a lighter touch teacher training, does that kind of blur the lines of what a mindfulness teacher is? I think that's where the fear is a little bit, that because I think what the participant receives is all about what the teacher gives and the embodiment and everything that you're describing. But if the teacher themselves hasn't had the depth of training to really understand, that's where the concern, I think, comes from.
Sure. So there isn't, it's, the depth is still there, but there's more stepping off points, because what we're recognizing is that not everybody's going to be stepping off at the point of wanting to teach the full 8-week course. People are using the practices in different ways. So I had an email this week from a violin teacher who wanted to learn mindfulness as part of, you know, just being there with his pupils. And he doesn't need to learn the MBCT, the full, you know, he doesn't need to do the full teacher training. So it's this wider range, and the dentist who wants just to be able to be more present and to support his, you know, when you're lying there in the chair looking up, you know, to just, so lots of different ways that mindfulness is of relevance, and you know, also, yeah. So I think there's just, what we're wanting to do is to broaden the possibilities of how this work can touch. Yeah. And I think the other shift that's happened, I mean, you could almost say this is this challenge we're facing is the stress of success. You know, I could never have imagined 20 years ago that actually it would be a reality that mindfulness is embedded into our working contexts and our mainstream institutions, that could be considered normal. And it is actually now. It's part of, you know, and I know our workplaces are very troubled places, a lot of them, and the NHS is, you know, so it's not like it's actually, you know, done what's needed. But it, you know, the work is different, and actually the business of teaching mindfulness privately, which was, you could very much make a livelihood out of that several years ago. I think the pathways into teaching now are much more through your practice in whatever context you're already in. So it's a kind of part of what you do, rather than seeing yourself as a standalone mindfulness teacher.
Yeah. I'll be very brief. I think it's two fabulous questions there. Just to say that, you know, certainly in the Mindfulness Network, we don't feel that it's trained to teach mindfulness the end. That's why we have retreats, and the retreats are very, you know, deeply based in mindfulness practice, foundations of mindfulness, but also, you know, there is no end to the personal development. That's been my experience. I found the curriculum, it couldn't feel like a straitjacket, but I trained initially when the curriculum was much more emphasized in terms of how you delivered it. But that for me at the time was really helpful for me to understand. But I actually now have a much deeper appreciation of what's at the back of it. So I feel I guess it's like learning music, eventually you feel you can improvise a little bit, but you do need the theory at the back of you.
Thank you. So I'm mindful of making space for the next speaker to prepare. Thank you for your questions. And can I assume that it's okay for people to come and find you upstairs and perhaps continue the conversation? Okay, lovely. So I think I can say this on behalf of the whole group here. Thank you for such a nourishing and hopeful talk, and for your presence here today. So thank you very much indeed. Yeah.